Hello, I am Mark Grigorian, and you are watching one of the talks of the series Let's Talk About Future. And we are going to talk about the guests. And today we're switching the roles. It would be me who would be the guest. And in the role of Mark Grigorian, that is to say, the person who will be conducting will be Nuné Alekian. Nuna, I know that it's for you now. The floor is yours. And I'll be the invited person. I'm very delighted to be here. I am Mark Grigorian, as you can see. And still, my name is Nuné Alekian. Mark, we have known each other for some 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And you were giving us a review for one of the rubrics of the work on the Crossroads, which we were co-authoring with Ruben Vartanyan. Yeah, it was critics, but it was still positively tuned. Yeah, that cannot be. And then we started having conversations about the future. We understood that we need to talk about the future. You are someone who is really busy. You're the director of the museum. You're preparing a book to be published. You're constantly traveling back and forth to Stepanakert. You're teaching young journalists. You are a person who doesn't have free time. Tell us, please, why after the war, you yourself, in fact, if I remember it right, mentioned in the conversation to me, Nuna, we need to talk about the future. Where did you have the energy from? Why did you think of doing it, to initiate it, of initiating it? You know what? If it's energy, then the energy existed and it's still remaining. I was based on the following, that what do we have after the war? There was a defeat for us. The society needs to find the force to look itself in the eye, in the mirror, to be able to understand what went right, what went wrong, and what needed to be changed, how we want to change this, and if we want to change something, all of these changes have a vector towards the future. It's a conversation about where we want to go, where we want to be, and how we want to go from point A that we're currently at to point B, which awaits us in the future. Naturally, as a journalist, I was interested in having the debates and conversations start in the society for them to gain public sector, public side, so that people who are on the air, as we're just like on the air on the internet and on the streets, in the cafes, try to understand what we wanted from ourselves, what we want to become like. And you know what? I'm very happy. I'm almost proud, a little more, and I'll be proud that this conversation started. That in our society now, there is a discourse that calls for it, that needs us to tell where we are going, where we're heading, what we're looking for. You know what? Of course, it's a pity that these conversations happen because of the war. There was a defeat. But sooner or later, we had to start conversations like this. And this is how it happened. That part occurred now. You know what? Some people, some of our viewers, when we were having the first interviews, I think it was just 4 weeks after the November 10 treaty agreement signature, many people were getting annoyed and they were saying, we shouldn't be talking, we should be working. Did you have that feeling? How to spend the time optimally? Maybe you needed to do something. On the one hand, you yourself mentioned that we were doing something all of the time. I was doing something all of the time. I was going to Stepanakert. I was helping the Artsakh public radio. I was teaching, lecturing, etc., etc. The thing is not about what I was doing. The thing is that the conversation at some point, how to put it, at some point in time, conversation itself is a deed, it's an action. It's as if when a ruler says something, his or her actions, in the same vein, the deed, the action of a journalist is a conversation. It's a possibility to create a discussion with an interlocutor, to have different points of view arise, and to also have the disputes in the society. I do not share the opinion that truth is born in a dispute. I believe that truth is born regardless of disputes. Because quite often the truth is being lost and goes to the background when there are disputes happening. We're seeing this almost every day in the social networks that have become an important part of our life. Whenever there is a dispute in social networks, it happens because of some secondary or tertiary reasons and not primary ones. It doesn't often lead to the understanding of the truth, but to the truth being covered and darkened and eclipsed. So, what I wanted was that we as a nation, well, I don't like that word so much, but I would still say that as a nation, where are we going? What do we want from the diaspora? What does the diaspora want from us? How do we see the development of Karabakh, Artsakh after the war? How Artsakh sees this development in the aftermath of the war? You see, these are questions. And there is another subtlety that was really considerable to me, of considerable importance, to ask questions not to political figures. Because, political figures, they are working in different mechanisms and in a different reality now. I wanted to talk to people who would be far away from politics, but people who would understand the current issues that we are facing. That's what I think this series of conversations was about. It was in this vein and in this direction, and I'm really happy that we could keep it up naturally, Mark. And before we start having a reflection about what was said, a lot of people and from a lot of different countries, Armenians, non-Armenians, were participating in a variety of languages across different languages. This were political specialists, economists, people of different. Before we assuming, like summarizing the questions, we would like to see what the difference was and this consensus. That's what I call the integral. I have a hypothesis, and I've been living for long in this world, so I have this question to you. Nubar Afian, one of our guests, once said that it's very difficult and sometimes it's even outright scary to talk about the future, because the moment that you pronounce the future, in a way you take up the responsibility for that future. This is one of the citations that I'd like you to reflect on. And the second is another guest of yours said why Armenians are always gathered together when there is a threat facing them collectively, but in the aftermath they spread and scatter and they're just trying to earn money and sort of waiting for the next genocide to happen, to come along. And from that perspective, I would be saying, is it scary? Yeah, it's very difficult. Armenia 2022, we're trying to talk about it, to talk about the scenarios that may unfold. And the readers of our manuscripts were giving their reviews and feedbacks. But when we tried to organize round tables, people would talk to each other. They would talk to us, but not to each other. What is this? Is it because they are scared? Are we afraid of the future? We like living in the cycle of awaiting genocide? You have asked a lot of questions for the time being. I am not a journalist, and we have agreed upon that. Let me start with the answer to the first question, and then you'll just remind me the other questions should I forget. In the first question, you mentioned the word responsibility. I believe it's a word of utmost importance. That is to say, I'm responsible for the future, not only for my future, and the future for my children as well. The question is whether I am responsible for the future of children of my neighbors, whether I'm responsible for children, for people who live in Dilijan, in Vanadzor, in Hrazdan, in Goris, and in other towns and cities of Armenia. Can I be responsible for their future if I'm a simple mere mortal, an ordinary human being? I'm just writing and speaking. From the moment that I start thinking that I'm not responsible for that future, I lose the right of thinking about my own future and the future of my family, because I understand that we are inseparable from each other. We coexist. We coexist as people who live within the confines of one country, who share one language, and people who it seems understand each other. I am responsible for the future also because in the past I was making some announcements and declarations and statements, and I was supporting someone who was not the best choice, or maybe was the best choice. It doesn't matter. And my support in the past later on affects the future, and not only my future, but also the future of the entire country. This is the responsibility that we don't know, that we're not used to. Very often we're saying, you know what, we lost the war. Yeah, we lost it because someone was a betrayer, someone was a scoundrel, someone was a corrupt person. This was a person who represented the Soros organizations, etc., etc. And what? We didn't even lose the war. This responsibility that needs to be taken on. Yeah, they say this pun, this game of words that we are using. Am I to blame? Am I responsible? All of this, you know, the desire to avoid it. It's deep in us. And there is the concept of individual responsibility and collective responsibility. Collective responsibility, you know, it's based on the fact that when you're walking on the streets of Yerevan, people, let's say, can litter and just drop a cigarette end on the street because there are some people whose job it is to clean, right? So it's not a shame. You see what? That's a problem. People who enter a shop and who think that it's normal to touch the bread, to choose one loaf of bread, and they do not think to them will enter the shop and will be choosing the loaf of bread that they have just touched. This is the responsibility. This is the responsibility of the routine, a daily responsibility that to be found in details. But behind this trifle meticulousness, we see our responsibility for the future, our children and our grandchildren. And a question I have to you. When Derlugan put it very well, saying that it's as if future is as if playing backgammon with 6 dices. You never know what the scenarios can be like. There are very many scenarios. I've had this feeling, and maybe I'm wrong, but I was thinking that if we don't take on responsibility for the future, if we don't articulate it, we replicate the same scenarios. Let's take a look. We dream of the end of the history. There is a philosophical concept called the end of history. You know, this was one of the foundations of the communist theory. That is to say, first you have the primitive societies and the slaves, feudalism, communism, capitalism, communism, and then there is nothing. After communism, that would be eternal happiness, and that's it. The history will be over. We all of my generation, dreams of living in a period of time when the history would be over, when nothing would happen anymore in the world. And if I get 120,000 dirhams, which is a little more than $200 per month. That is to say, that's it. Okay, because the history was over. I have no aspirations, ambitions. I cannot. Let my this is a situation where I have to be a little bit aware all of the time and to know all of the time what's happening. I think that this situation where you have to adapt to something all of the time is more important than having a deep pause when we don't move anywhere else in our minds and activities. I am against this. I think that if we want to have a future like people, nation, families, we have to move forward. And here a question arises: where forward? Where the future is? Okay. You know, there is another aspect, the ability to talk about future that was seen very clearly in your conversation with an Azerbaijani political specialist, Aynusov. He articulated an idea that, much to my shame, I've not even thought of. He said, I'll try to cite it: we need to learn to speak. This is the defense mechanism of the defeated people. Armenia and Azerbaijan are both having this and undergoing this because Armenia is now defeated and Azerbaijan was defeated in the 1990s. This is a vicious circle, moving throughout the circle, and we're all in. I about the of other people who lost the first war, Karabakh War. We see the view exactly that many Azerbaijani people don't understand the pain that we are having, we're undergoing now. You know, this inability to speak, all of the discourse that we see of the Azerbaijani elite that causes fear, depression, pain in us. Actually, this is because of the inability to speak. Your generation was Azerbaijani people. And the younger generation, they have seen each other in military conditions, hidden in bunkers. So this is very, very, my generation, I don't know a single Azerbaijani person personally. Okay, this is not only that we don't know each other, we're demonizing each other. This is about demonization. What helps this demonization a lot is that we call Azerbaijani people Turks and they themselves call themselves Turks. This, you know, this immediately makes the demonization level of each other higher. This increases the gap of understanding of each other because the conflicting sides are seen as an enemy monolith that is thinking in that direction, how to get rid of me, how to destroy me. And of course, every year, year by year, this is getting harder and more complex. However, you see, the expression, what should I be talking about with you? We have nothing to talk about because you have destroyed the dome of the church itself. You have killed so many people, so many Armenians. You have done this and you've done that. We have nothing to talk about. What we have to talk about, this cycle exists. And this is a psychology that needs winning side. There should be a desire to speak with the defeated people. You know what? We had this, but it was not manifested in a political level, was not shown in a political level. And sometimes we have that desire. And I would say that the political of Azerbaijan, they need to show the desire to talk. But instead of this, they show the desire to trade the prisoners of war, sorry for putting it like that, to trade the blocked roads in the future, the closed roads. This too is an important element of the future. You see, we don't have a future without Azerbaijan, in the same way as Azerbaijan doesn't have a future without Armenia. We don't have a future without Turks, and the Turks don't have a future without Armenians. The same goes about our neighbors. The same is true of our neighbors. We are not living on the moon. We're not living in a vacuum. We cannot take Armenia and paste it to a different place. Sooner or later, this will be resolved. This goes that way. Of course, it would be best to have a positive resolution so that everyone is happy, and the sooner the better. Of course, it is likely that if we are continuing to think about this, not be here. And that is, if we're having this and that distinction, then we'll be having the dispute go on. How are we going to resolve this dispute? Both sides and both parties need to look at the situation in the same way, thinking of, you know what, we belong to the land. It's not the land belongs to us. From the song of Armenian singer Artsakh Boyajan. But there is another, I think, like this. Are you thinking in the same way? I don't trust you. Because you already did the genocide to me 100 years ago. Why should I trust you? And this mistrust, hating of one of another that is cyclical, moving in cycles, all of this is disrupting our lives. It makes all of us, the defeated people, the winners, all of us miserable. You have talked extensively with your guest about the concept of identity. I think there was one of the guests who said that the national identity of Azerbaijani people was actually formed as a result of the First Karabakh War. And this is the identity of being against Armenians. So it's a negative selection, negative lens. So to this or that extent, not directly, indirectly, we were the trigger, the catalyst for the creation of modern Azerbaijani identity that there is right now. But of course, our identity too, as Nuné talked about that, Armenian is a person who is against the Turks. Is this what we want to see when we're talking about the future? Is this the picture, the image, the collective image of Armenians? And how can we get out of this? It's very difficult to get out of this. There is a science branch called conflict studies, conflictology. And of course, the center of this is conflict and the parameters of conflict. It should be said that for all of the conflicts, there is this type of thinking. It's not me. It's him who started it first. It's the opposite side. It's this person who threw a stone, who spit it, who hit. I'm good. I am not to blame. Both sides of the conflict are good. And it's often not a question of, let's say, 7-year-old boys who had the conflict being resolved easily. When there is a nation, a country, this is much higher, much more complex. And the transformation of the conflict is a very hard thing. And it cannot be monolateral, it's not one-sided. You know, this is a process. All the conflicts exist in a temporal situation. They cannot do without time. They started somewhere. There was a development, transformation, and let's hope for it, an end. The question is when the end will come. And in reality, we understand that the end should come. And what should the end be like? What should the end be like? So that the Church of Razan becomes a mosque? Can this be the end of conflict? Obviously not. And the vast majority of your guests, of the invitees, have agreed that the conflict has not been resolved yet. There will be a third and a fourth Karabakh war. Unfortunately, I agree with them. However, at the same time, what about if you're thinking of 1990s and Baku of that period and Baku of 2020, these are very different. We should not be looking back at history only. We should not be prisoners of history. What I'm trying to say is that each war, it cannot be over, because what was not over was the question of independence of Artsakh. Actually, the aim was the independence of Artsakh. That's why it started 30 years back. It was not 30 years ago. It started much earlier, much and much earlier. Secondly, allow me to give you an example. In one of the Armenia, I once opened a local newspaper. I'm talking of something that happened around 20 years ago. I opened a local newspaper for the May months. In May, we had the Avarai else, winning the victory of the Second World War, and also the treaty with Azerbaijan was signed and Shushi was taken back. 20 years ago, it was 2000. The fresh news of the newspaper dated back to 6 years ago. There was an impression that the people who wrote the newspaper, they lived at the same time in all periods of time. When there was the Avarai battle, which for us is not yet relevant, that it was 1,500 years ago. And they also lived during the Second World War and during the First Karabakh War. We have this aspiration too. We live at all periods of time at the same time. That is to say, it's April 1915, and it's as living, as close to us, as important and significant as it was then 106 years ago. This is a feature not only to Armenians. I would say this is something regional, because Georgians also have a similar approach to their time, and Azerbaijani people likewise. The question is that this needs to be understood. In this time, in this life, that doesn't exist. There is no today, there is no tomorrow. Because we live during all these points and periods of time at the same time. the past as well. I cannot say that the conversations that we initiated together in December 2020 are meant to prompt change, and this because it's beyond our powers, and but our conversations can help and can lead to the understanding that yes, we live during all of these points of time, but there is another time coming. It's called the future. Thank you, Mark. Let's leave the topic of Artsakh, even though this is a topic that is very impertinent, and let's talk about the needs of the society, of Armenian society. There were two guests set the same thesis with paradoxical different outcomes. Professor Derlugian and Alexander, the idea follows. After the collapse of the USSR, we were the party nomenclature, and we wanted to have an smart power, wanted someone and a stricter regime, and that was a force power. We had bureaucracy, we had technocracy, then there was honesty. But both of your guests agree with this statement, with this diagnosis, if we can call it so. Professor Derlugian says that there is a request for competence today, and Derlugian says that the request for competence has not yet been formulated. And my question to you is what you would like to see as a request from given by the society, because it largely defines the powers that we have, the authorities that we have, the authorities that we deserve. What would you like to see as a request? What's your personal point of view? I really need and lack in our today's society the request, the demand for competence. I understand that we have a society that does amateur jobs, of course, with exceptions. We have a society where professionalism, the ability to work hard, dynamic approach, thinking approach, cognitive approaches, they are all replaced and substituted work experience. That is to say, today, work experience is being valued than all of the properties that I have mentioned above. There are a great many illustrations for this. When I became the director of the public radio for Armenia, I noticed that the authors of programs can be classified into two groups. The first group is people who are noted for work experience as journalists. They have titles and awards, medals, and all of that. And the second group, these are the non-journalists. This is people from the street, smart, intelligent, people who can think and speak, but they're not journalists. They're doing programs not worse than those that are done by journalists. This is the devaluation, the deterioration and debilitation of the profession. Not only deterioration of the profession, but deterioration of our thoughts about who a real professional is. A doctor, yeah, we want a quality doctor, but we don't mind going to a healer. We went to the Polytechnical University, but decided to do healing. Let's say in the areas where I'm working right now, currently, there is demand for great museum specialists, but it is a journal. Everyone is telling me that I'm doing my job well, but this is not right. A lawyer should not be head of the health sector. A lawyer has different functions, a different profession. And maybe a lawyer can deal and manage with health sector better than a public health specialist. However, the professional problem then. And you know what? In the humanities, there are a great many problems like that. I'd be very happy if there were demand for professionalism in humanities that would be formulated. Of course, there are some professions where this demand exists. IT specialists, of course, have it formulated. Musicians, of course. I cannot, because you would immediately feel that it's taken and I'm not a musician, etc. But on the other hand, right now, I can start writing. I can start drawing. Paintings, abstract paintings, or conceptual art. Very few people would understand this, and the rest would say this is amazing and would start admiring it. Okay, competence based on what we have. It's, for example, the polls shows that more than 50% of the people really don't know who to vote for. Competence maybe is enough. Is necessary, but not enough. Any other demands by society you'd like us to have? Well, I'd like to have a demand for honesty. I don't think that today we have such a demand formulated. It is to what degree I ask for honesty from other people when there is a question of how to have their niece go to some work, how to help someone get hired, how to help someone's son get a mark that they don't deserve, a grade that they don't deserve. We refer to the same old mechanisms and methods. I'd like to have a demand for it. We all talk about it. We say the problem is in the education, but we don't have a demand for competence in education. You see, we are ready to substitute the demand for competence by a demand for awards, titles, and previous achievements and attainments and prizes that have been won. But they do not always solve the problems. Maybe I'm a great mathematician, but I'm a bad teacher of mathematics because I'm good as a scientist, but not as a teacher. You know, this is also something that disrupts us. I have a demand for my children to have high grades, but I'm ready to achieve it. But I don't have an inner grade of them, learn really getting deep and profound into that these are not just teachers who give good grades, but who would also teach them. Thank you. We have very limited time left. I have two big questions, and I'd like you to choose which to answer to, which to untangle and talk around. The first is about the diaspora, whatever we talked about the diaspora. And the second, and of course, combine, and you may decide not to combine. And let me try to answer both questions, but briefly. For 11 years, I have lived in the diaspora. In Armenian, there is this word, hayrenadart, which is translated as a person who came back to their motherland and fatherland. That's who I am. For 11 years, I lived abroad. And this clearly showed me that the diaspora wants a completely different level of cooperation with the motherland. The diaspora is dreaming of being useful for Armenia. I say that I really wanted our communication with diaspora to lead to the understanding that diaspora can give more, is able to give more, and is capable of giving more. The journalists from diaspora should not do museum work in the diaspora in Armenia, but we understand that there is nothing else. This is very important. And the question is not just to have 100 great young specialists come from the diaspora and start working bureaucratic institutes. This needs to be deeper, multi-sided, and so far we can't see it. And I think this would be one of the demands that would be formulated by the society. I tried to be brief. The second question was about myth. Let me talk about the myth. We love myths. We admire them. We generate them out of nothing. We create myths and we believe in the myth. When the reality clashes with the myths, as a rule, win. You know, I think that this makes our life closer with the literature of mythical realism, magical realism, which is well known from Latin America. And the most prominent and author that I admire is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. There is Isabel Allende, a wonderful author that writes in that style, in magical realism. Our realism should not and cannot be magical. It's one thing to dream, to wish, to imagine, to envision, and visualize the future and what my future can be like, what my present can be like. And the difference is to really live in that present, with 2 feet being on the ground, with being down to earth. This is the feature that I'd really like to see in my compatriots, in my neighbors, in Armenians, and in me myself. Because I'm an Armenian who lives in Yerevan, who is part of this society, obviously, and I'd like that too. Mark, I have an endless and infinite number of questions, but as usual, time is pressing. So let me ask you this, Mark, during the recent months, connected to your studio and the 15 interviews that were there, what did you remember most? The most vivid, would you remember it? The thing is that for me, these interviews are a great opportunity to go back to the past when I was working at BBC and where daily I worked with around with the same profundity, depths of conversations and thoughts, of course. And what was really important for me was that during all these interviews, there were different people from different countries. So these are not only people from Yerevan or Stepanakert who are talking about life in Armenia, but let's say people from Michigan, from London. Derlugian was in Yerevan, but he teaches in Abu Dhabi, from Moscow. If I'm not mistaken, from Holland. Arefinos of, I think it's Holland or Belgium. And they are interested. This is super important. They show their interest. They want it to be better here for us. But we have big projects and grand plans awaiting us, right? Yes. And what I really wanted to say is that I'm very unhappy to say that the number of women is so little among these people, so insignificant. I would really like women to have access to our microphone, at least to our microphone, because they can voice their opinions and their points of view. I think that that's also my own problem. Maybe I didn't work well enough, but I'll be trying to fix it and to work better. And I'd like to hear more young voices. What else would you like to talk about that we have not about? We didn't manage to talk about a lot. We didn't manage to talk about how we There is a phrase that I like. Armenia should become a powerful country. I would really like to talk to people who express this idea. How can a country that has 3 million people become powerful, become mighty? What does it mean, powerful and mighty? What is the sense that they put in this word? To what extent this sense of might is militarized? To what extent is it oriented towards science and a more assured vector of future, etc.? Probably this is one of the myths as well. Can a 3 million people country dispute with a country that has 50 million people? And if so, in what sectors, how, and in what way? I'm sure that we can. Len will talk about it. We will. Mark, I'd like to express my gratitude for you. When after the war it was difficult to breathe, our constant interaction and conversation gave me a lot of power. I'm super thankful to this. I believe that the future holds very many interesting conversations with us. I'm turning to the audience. Dear audience, we're moving forward. We're trying to construct the future. And that puts on and gains a more inclusive character. So I'm asking to all of our audience, all of the followers of the platform of Future Studio, to support the Future of Armenians initiatives that has been created by our friends. And we will be inviting the best, the least indifferent, and the most important people who would be constructing the future. Please share our videos. We'd like to have more people on this platform so that more people would know what we're doing, how we're doing this. And if you go to the website of Future Armenia, you would see 15 statements there. And if you read them carefully, you would understand that what we were talking about with Mark today is largely the point of view of Mark towards the 15 statements that last week were co-authored with a lot of friends and great people, and they were published. You can become a co-author. You can join the initiative. So Mark and I will go on a small break. I think it's a week. Yeah, it's for a week. So next Thursday, watch us, listen to us, and we hope we'll have interesting guests and interesting conversations unfolding. Thanks, Mark. Thank you, Nuné.